Hey guys, it's old Rand here on behalf of Premier Pro Wrestling with bad news, sad news, especially for me. I'm probably oversensitive to this one because it was 1 week ago tonight at this time that we're talking that my father passed. And then it was 15 days before my father passed that my mother succumbed to cancer. But NFL legend and wrestling legend Russ Francis died today. I'm not sure if it's today or last night. I'll get to that, but I just want to say that we're going to go ahead and talk about Russ Francis for a couple of reasons. The first reason is this. Yes, he was an outstanding NFL player, man, as traveled as they come. But what you don't know is the way I understand the story, and I'll do some more fact-checking into this. His father, Ed Francis, is who owned the largest promotion in Hawaii back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And he was a wrestler and a promoter, Ed Francis. And also that means Russ grew up in a wrestling family, and his brother, Bill Francis, was a professional wrestler. Now, the mainstream media is getting it wrong, and I'm not hating, and I'm not hating on young people getting it wrong either. But they say that the only time he wrestled was in that Wrestlemania, I want to say Wrestlemania 2, in that NFL Players Battle Royal, blah, 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 blah. That's not true. I saw Russ Francis in wrestling magazines. It must have been about 77. And I thought, hey, I know him from football. So when I would read the magazines, I'd say, man, that's what I want to do when I grow up. When I grow up, I want to play professional football and use that notoriety to get into wrestling. It was very common at the time for football players to play to wrestle in the off season, and I'm sure there's even more, but I can't find how far back the documentation goes of Russ Francis and professional wrestling and working for the Hawaii territory. And the Hawaii territory was eventually sold to Peter Maivia, the grandfather of Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. Autumn Branchard was home with her family when her dad saw the plane take off from his porch around 4 p.m. and heard it come crashing down 9 minutes later. I could see it. There was fuel pouring on their faces, and they were trying to grab a rag to get it off their faces, she said. Town of North Elba town supervisor Derek Dottie confirmed that Russ Francis was one of the two people on board the plane when it crashed. Doty told NBC5 that Francis' family is traveling to Lake Placid today. The airport is owned by the town of North Elba. According to the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, Senior Vice President Richard McSpadden was the second victim in the crash. McSpadden served as the commander of the U.S. Air Force, and this is sad too, Thunderbirds during his military career. The organization says Francis, who recently bought Lake Placid Airways, working with McSpadden on a feature in Lake Placid at the time of the crash. Well, that's too bad. The organization released a statement saying the Cessna 177 Cardinal, in which Richard was in the right seat, experienced an emergency after takeoff. The airplane attempted to return to the airport but failed to make the runway, and both occupants sadly lost their life. Francis was a former Patriots and 49ers tight end, according to NBC News. He was the Patriots' first-round draft pick in 1975 after playing at Oregon, and made three Pro Bowls and earned 2 second-team All-Pro selections with New England before retiring after the 1980 season. Francis returned to play in 82, which I did not know, and was traded to San Francisco, where he spent 6 seasons and won a Super Bowl. He wound up his career by returning to New England, which that must have been great for the fans, by the way. From what I understand, was a class act. Returning to England after being waived in 1987, he played his final 12 games for the Pats in 1988. Francis had, dig this, 393 catches for 62 yards and 40 touchdowns over his entire career. He ranks 21st all-time in catches and 16th in receiving yards for Patriots and 30th and 32nd in the same categories for the 49ers. And dig this, he was only 70 years old On behalf of the entire New England Patriots organization, we extend our sincerest sympathies to the family of Russ Francis, who tragically passed away yesterday, said Patriots Chairman and CEO Robert Kraft in a prepared statement. I mean, this is something, folks. This is an athlete. This is one of those guys that I'm always talking about, especially to you young people. You know, I don't care if you're a wrestling fan or if you're a wrestling fan and you're a prospective wrestler. If you're an idiot, just don't bother. Just take up bowling or softball or darts. You'll do better and spend less money. But what I'm trying to say is Russ Francis is a guy that draws you a roadmap, man, on how to be. Can you imagine what a spectacular athlete? He had such a long career in the first place. This guy dips out for a few years, and then he makes his return how many years later, and he's the same NFL caliber ball player that finished the last 12 games of his career, man. To me, that's outstanding, you know. And again, with the wrestling, he was raised in a wrestling family. Right now, I'm going to tell you about Ed Francis. And the only reason this comes up is because I have a friend on Facebook that he was the first one that I saw that Russ had died, that Francis had died. And he only saw that and was only aware of, and he's got to be between 30 and 40. Even he was only aware of the fact that Francis's wrestling was in the Wrestlemania 2, you know, Goofy Battle Royal. Edmund Charles Francis. He was born June 11th, 1926. He died November 18th, 2016. That's a long life, ain't it? He was a professional wrestler and wrestling promoter in Hawaii in the 60s. Many wrestlers who came through Hawaii in the 60s and 70s were bound to come across the name Ed Francis. However, the glory days of territorial wrestling were coming to an end, and in 79, he sold the 50th state big-time wrestling promotion to High Chief Peter Maivia. Pretty cool, huh? Ed Francis raised his children on the windward side of, you got to bear with me, it looks like Kalua'oa on Hawaii. His two sons, Bill and Russ, also enjoyed a wrestling career for a little while. Russ also had a career in the NFL, which is pretty freaking, that's an understatement of the year, right? And I didn't know this. Russ played a total of 13 seasons. He won a Super Bowl when he was playing for the 49ers, my friends. He later went on to work for the Omaha Beef Arena football team. One of the Francis brothers' contemporaries was wrestler Don Morocco. So there wouldn't have been a Don Morocco, the original Rock, without Ed Francis, Bill Francis, and my man, the legendary Russ Francis. They attended high school together. I had no fucking idea. Along with his two famous sons, he also had 4 other sons and a daughter. Ed, Sonny Francis, Stephen, Bob, James, and Arlene, whose nickname was Pixie. And he later moved his brood to Eugene, Oregon. That's pretty cool. I've been to Eugene. I fucking love Eugene, my friends. So there's just so much here, you know, in regards to the wrestling industry. You know, I'm not going to go ahead and get into his brother, but I will state that he and his brother were actually tag team champions at one point. And I knew for Russ Francis to get into the publications at the time in the 70s, and I'm going to go ahead and say I had to have been about 9 years old. So I think that it's just so hard to find that information today that, you know, the general public only believes that he was just a, you know, one-time flash in the pan WWE hook, you know, where in fact, I bet you he's probably wrestled off and on for most of his young adult life, possibly teen lives, because that's how we did it back then, you know. And, you know, he was raised in that family, so I'm sure he ended up loving the wrestling industry one way, shape, or form. But anyway, it saddens me and it saddens all of us. And, you know, another thing that's kind of sad to me is that the, you know, the mainstream doesn't know the full story. You know, it's just all buried by WWE, which is fine. But at the end of the day, man, it's the history of wrestling that counts, you know. If you don't know where you're going, how do you know I mean, if you don't know where you've been, how do you know where you're going? You know what I'm saying? And, I wish him Godspeed on his way to wherever he's going at this point. And may God provide his friends, family, and loved ones comfort. All right, guys. If you pray, throw one up there tonight when you go to sleep for Russ Francis' soul, and once again his friends, family, and loved ones.